Empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men. Power Black men. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men to live extraordinary lives. Shatter the stereotypes. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men to live extraordinary lives.
Welcome to Shatter the Stereotypes, where the intention is to empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. This show is based on the simple idea that every Black man is capable of creating inner peace, dynamic health, great relationships, and financial abundance. Therefore, we provide insights and strategies to educate, motivate, and inspire Black men to reach their full potential and create the life of their dreams. So if you're ready for some high-octane motivation and inspiration that supports and empowers you to live the life you were born to live, get ready to shatter the stereotypes so you can build a life that lights you up and positively impacts the world. So now, let's shatter the stereotypes with your host, Coach Michael Taylor.
Hello and welcome to Shatter the Stereotypes, where my intention is to empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. You see, there's never been a shortage of Black male role models. There's only been a lack of exposure of those role models in mainstream media. So my intention is to showcase and highlight Black men who are doing remarkable things in the world. And contrary to mainstream media, it is my belief that Black men are actually thriving and experiencing unprecedented levels of success in the world today. Now, I know this may be an unpopular opinion right now because I realize some people will point to the recent Supreme Court ruling regarding affirmative action programs. People will bring up the banning of books about slavery and critical race theory. Of course, there's the problem of racism and police brutality. And then there's Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. So I understand why some people may be a lot more pessimistic and disagree with my belief. But despite all of the obvious challenges facing Black men, I still fervently believe that Black men are thriving and the future is filled with infinite possibilities for any Black man who is committed to creating an extraordinary life. And there are lots of reasons for my optimism. And one of those reasons is this podcast. I have an opportunity to interview Black men from a wide variety of professions, and I'm always filled with optimism after each episode because each brother that I interview on this show are out in the world, shattering stereotypes and making a positive impact on the world. And my guest today is no different. His name is Abraham Williamson, and he's a Harvard graduate who also has a degree from Cambridge and Howard University. He's a startup lawyer at Go With Canvas, and he's the host of the Diverse Tech Founders podcast, which was rated as the number 11 startup podcast in the world in 2022. So without question, he is shattering stereotypes, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome him to the podcast. So hello, Abraham, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing well and excited for this conversation, Michael.
All righty. So before we jump into your work, let's start off with a few icebreakers. So first of all, tell us where you're from.
Sure. I'm originally from North Little Rock, Arkansas, and I love being from Arkansas, the natural state. We have a certain, we're different people back in Arkansas, and it was a pleasure kind of growing up there in a town of maybe like 60,000 people, right outside of Little Rock. A lot of my family was around me back then, my grandparents as well. So that's about where I grew up. I went to public school, and then when I was a senior in high school, we ended up moving to Lindale, Texas, but I'm originally from North Little Rock.
All righty. Now, with that being said, tell us a little bit about your immediate family. You're married, you got kids. Tell us about that.
Sure. So I'm, I guess, according to the tax folks, single. I'm not yet married, although I'm in a relationship, and it's a great one. Really, really enjoy learning these past 18 months with my now girlfriend. So I don't have any kids either, although I do come from somewhat of a large family. I'm one of seven between my parents, and on my mother's side, I think she's one of seven. So I don't know how large my family will be, but very family oriented.
There you go. With that being said, name a woman who's inspired you to be who you are.
Ooh, that's a great question. So I'll go non-family members. Constance Baker Motley. She was one of the lawyers during the desegregation movement through the South. So she worked with Thurgood Marshall and Derrick Bell and some of the other, lawyers in the South who were really fighting for, equal rights, so to speak. And she eventually became a judge. So she went from, being in the courtroom advocating to on the judge side, and eventually made her way up to the Second Circuit in New York, Court of Appeals, becoming not just the first Black person, but the first woman to serve in that regard. And I remember learning her story a bit more when I was in law school and just really being kind of enamored with it, but also interested in the story because, speaking of stereotypes, there was a stereotype that she would maybe rule a certain way, and she broke them.
Mm,
And when you do the math on it, you kind of see that she had a unique voice. So anyway, that was a motivator for me, just to name a few, or just to name one.
nice. Now, name a man that you look up to and admire.
Ooh, that's a good question. It's hard not to go to my family immediately there. It's, not just my father, but my grandfather, who started his own business with his brother, and in the midst of losing his own father for so I usually don't talk about this, but in looking at my family history, seeing that, my grandfather and his brother started a business knowing that their ancestors were lynched or killed for starting a business was always really inspiring to me. Whenever am I won't say second guessing myself, but whenever I'm looking for additional drive or discipline in my business, I think about that. If they can do that in the midst of that knowledge, then surely I can deal with whatever I'm dealing with in my own life.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting because it's like, I know for myself, as a man who happens to be Black, when I see stories of slavery and lynchings and so forth, it actually inspires me. It inspires me from the standpoint of knowing that I come from a group of people that were able to endure that. And despite all the challenges, right, that's been placed in front of us, look at what we've overcome. And that always inspires me. So I appreciate you sharing that. Now, if you were trapped on an island for 30 days and you could only take one book with you, what book would you take?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, the easy one would be, the holy book or a holy book for anybody. But if I'm thinking the main book that I would want to keep, let me think about this. Am I by myself forever? Because some books are
30
better,
days. 30
to be
days.
just 30 days.
Yeah.
Um, I really like, and this may be a controversial one, but I really like the 48 Laws of Power with Robert Greene. And I like it not just from like the strategy standpoint, but it helps me to think back to different moments in my life and how I dealt with them, and to really be more contemplative about it. And I really enjoyed that book, and I've read it multiple times. So if I had 30 days, I would probably take that one and read it to prepare for going back into the world, because you'll be isolated for 30 days. I mean, that can tax you a little bit, and it's easy for your social skills to atrophy. So just appreciating what he is commenting on in the book would be helpful to read through for 30 days if I was out there by myself.
There you go. Now, you like movies?
I do like movies, although I don't know if people will
pick
necessarily
one of
buy.
your pick one of your favorite ones.
Yeah, my favorite movie is The Dark Knight, Batman, and I've
Okay.
seen it easily over 100 times. Not recently, but there was a period of time where this is gonna sound crazy, but where I was basically watching it every single night. I just really like the performances. I think Heath Ledger did an amazing job in that film. I think it also deals with like good and evil, and seeing how otherwise good people can be turned in different ways. And so I always saw that as something to like defend against, and it really challenged my view of right and wrong. So I really like The Dark Knight in that movie. I think just cinematography is off the chain.
There you go. Yeah, see, my favorite is actually The Dark Knight Rises.
Oh, okay, really, we have something in common there. Okay.
Yeah, I love that whole series actually. So here's a question. So what does Abraham like to do for fun?
Ooh, that's a good question, and it has changed a bit over time. I should be more consistent, but I'll go through some of these things. I really like kind of outdoor activities, so I do enjoy like going for hikes. I was a part of an MMA gym, and I really enjoyed that too. Getting gloves and duking it out with people on the mat. I played saxophone when I was in the sixth and seventh grade, and I brought that back out. And I started up. I was like, I kind of have to reteach myself, starting with like Yankee Doodle Dandy and these other songs. So that's something that I enjoy. And then my sister actually got me into jigsaw puzzles when I went to visit her for 1 week. And so it sounds like who does jigsaw puzzles anymore, but it's actually a very enriching experience. And apparently it works both the left and the right side of your brain. And you get like little hits of dopamine every time a piece like gets in there. And then at the end of it, you have like this beautiful mosaic. So I really enjoy that too. And then some stuff that other people probably enjoy too. Like I really like to travel and move. In fact, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I can't remember the last time I spent 4 weeks consecutively there. I'm like constantly sort of on the move, but I enjoy that too.
Nice. Now, speaking of saxophone, there's an amazing, and you got to hear this,
Okay.
Asian female funk band, right?
Okay.
Asian female funk band called Tokyo Groove Joshi. That's Joshi.
Okay.
They've got this Asian female sax player that is freaking amazing. If you
I
have
love
a if you have a chance, go to YouTube. Tokyo Groove Joshi. Amazing. Amazing. The whole
it.
group.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
I wrote a book titled The Cure for Onlyness, a Black Man's Guide to Joy, Passion, and Purpose. And in the book, I talk about the feeling of onlyness that we as Black men experience sometimes when we're in environments where we're the only person of color. And I'm absolutely certain you've had that experience. So I'm curious, how do you navigate? And is that difficult for you to navigate?
Yeah, that's a very great question, Michael. So I had two situations in particular that come to mind. When I was in grad school at Cambridge, I did not meet another African American male who was a student there. There was an African American woman who was sort of in my faculty program, and then I met others who were Black but from different parts of the world. So I wasn't the only Black person, but was definitely the only African American male that I ever saw there, and I was there for 10 months. And I had another experience where I was working in a law firm where I was the only Black person in that office of like 30 or 35 lawyers. And in both of those situations, it was tough from the standpoint of not having somebody else who maybe really understood what that was like, similar to if you were another identity. It's just hard for people to relate if they haven't walked in those shoes. But I viewed it slightly differently. I said, there's also no other comparison for how to be Black. So I saw myself as an ambassador for the culture in a way where nobody could tell me that I was being too Black or not Black enough. I sort of defined it, and it made me feel a little bit more comfortable in being myself. Now, it wasn't always that way, but I had reached a point in my life where I said, this is me. I'm not trying to be anybody else. I'm not trying to appease or do anything. As long as I'm professional, please, respect what I'm doing. And I like that atmosphere. And it was in some ways, I don't want to say easier, but in some ways it was more amenable to live in my authentic self versus two other situations. One where you're a part of the majority group. I think that's just love. I went to Howard for undergrad, and that was just amazing in terms of learning that there are 1,000 ways to be Black. But in other situations where there are a number of other Black people, but it's not like a majority or anything, I find that in those situations, it can be tougher because you have different people negotiating the space differently. And there's more of a pressure to kind of fit in a certain way and not stand out too much because it could have some real impact. So I actually found being the only one, while it was trying, it's an opportunity for you to set the tone and pave the way for other people to be their authentic self moving forward without that dynamic of people making different choices.
Yeah, and that really kind of sums up the book, because the cure for loneliness, in my opinion, is simply self-awareness and understanding your authentic self. knowing who you really are and showing up in a way that you are just you. And that's a challenge, I think, if we have not done, especially as Black men, done our inner work, understanding and recognizing who we are. It's difficult. But when we have that strong sense of self, kind of like yourself, I've always seen myself somewhat as a representative for Black folk, right? So I try to show up in a way that if a white person interacts with me and they've never interacted with another Black person, they go, wow, So I try to show up that way in everything that I do. So with that being said, as a man who happens to be Black, are you optimistic or pessimistic in general about the future?
Optimistic, without a doubt, no hesitation. I mean, that is my predisposition because I feel like I won't speak for anybody. I'll just speak for myself. I feel like I have a direct influence and impact on the environment around me. I'm not going to say that I control it, but I will say that, it's up to me on how things, unfold around me. And you're going to be tried. I mean, I'm a lawyer, right? So people, I was saying this morning, people don't necessarily come to lawyer with easy problems. So you have to learn how to be a problem solver when you're faced with that. And one of my clients introduced me to this concept of being an anti-fragile system, meaning that the more pressure and the more difficulty that you experience and endure, the stronger you become, versus a
Mhm.
fragile system where the more pressure that you have, you break. So if we see ourselves as anti-fragile systems, no matter what's happening around us, we should see that as an opportunity to get stronger. And I follow somebody on Patreon, and they dropped a video of this man who had been essentially paralyzed from the neck down and was in a bit of a financial bind to where, in order to keep eligible for the government to pay for his healthcare, he couldn't make more than $800 a month. But if he did it on his own, it would cost him between $200,000 and $300,000 a year. So he was going to have to go from basically, about $10,000 a year to $300,000 a year, and he had to do it very quickly. And just watching him talk about his story, he said this concept that stuck with me ever since. This concept of the counter punch. We were just talking about MMA and boxing. But in boxing, if you look at the heavyweights or the fighters who really like deliver like the haymakers, they really bring it back. Like it's just like they're soccer punching people. The bigger their punch, the more exposed they are to a counterpunch, the more opportunity there is for you to respond. I don't mean to get violent on the podcast, but that idea of a counterpunch when you apply it to your life is, no matter how much something is coming at you, no matter how big, it's probably got an equal and opposite opportunity for you to overcome it and make the most of it. So that's how I kind of walk through and view life. People have tried me over and over again, doubted me. I'm sure they have for you as well. And if you have a pessimistic attitude, you're playing right into what they want you to do, which is not to succeed. So I force myself in a way to be optimistic, primarily through taking the time every morning, including this one, to be grateful for the things that I've had. Like at Access Granted, we talked about people who, they had, slept in their car, or they had been down on their luck. They know what it's like to be at zero in their bank account or negative. And having gone through some of those experiences myself, I can't help but be grateful to have what I have right now. And I never want to forget that.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I intuitively knew when I met you, man, I just want to connect with this brother. You have that energy about you, right? So I'm like, okay, let me just connect, because there were a couple of people in the room, and I think that happens a lot when you go to these types of conferences. You're just drawn to certain people, right? And I was just like drawn. I just like this guy's energy. Now I know why, because we share very similar philosophy. Now, by society standards, you're successful, and I'm curious though, how would you define success?
That's another really good question. I define it outwardly by how many people that I'm helping. And I don't mean necessarily numerically, but like how many people have I, um, you know, have I impacted in such a way where they feel like, but for our interaction, that it would have taken them longer time to get to where they are. So beforehand, I used to measure it like, how much money do I have in the bank account? And money is important. It's how we, as people keep score. It's not necessarily how I define success though, because even with this podcast or the podcast that I have, there's a difference. And I saw this on LinkedIn the other day. There's a difference in building a following and building an audience. And an audience doesn't have to be people who are just passively watching you. It could be people in your business who are watching you and tapping into your experience to help them. But that's how I view success. How
Yeah.
many people am I helping in my family, in my friend circle? How many people can I solve their problem when they need to? And I don't look at yesterday, I look at today.
There you go. Now, obviously, you're a pretty smart guy. So I want to go back a little bit. I want you to talk about Abraham in high school.
Hmm.
What were you like in high school?
That's another really great question. And it might surprise folks, but I don't think it'll surprise as many people as I would have thought at the time. So in high school, I did really well the first semester in classes. You normally made pretty strong marks. I was interested. Our school had the International Baccalaureate program, and I wanted to do that program as opposed to some of the other programs like advanced placement, because they told me that in advanced placement in AB classes, they test what you don't know. In IB, they test what you do know. And I just like the concept of them really making a broader like educational experience. But as I mentioned, I moved my senior year, and the year before that, my grades were absolutely terrible. It wasn't that I wasn't learning, I just wasn't really focused on the grades as much. And I mentioned that I was good the first semester, second semester, not so good because I was playing sports and baseball, and that became my focus. And it took me a minute to really learn how to balance those two. So, from an academic standpoint, I was curious learner, but I wasn't as focused. And I think a number of us in our community get wrapped up into that. When I was at Howard, I met folks who, had, a 1.0 or a 2.0 in high school, but they were crushing it on the standardized test because they had it. They just, weren't applying it. And then socially, I was a bit awkward. I would say like I was straddling somewhere between like the jocks playing baseball and sports, and also more of like, I guess you could say the nerdier folks, because I was on the debate team. So I straddled between the two and never really felt like I fit squarely into either one of them. So I had to get more comfortable like charting my own path, which was helpful because I wasn't feeling pulled in different directions. I was used to what it felt like to be on your own and to go out in the world and find your people regardless of the stereotypes around them. I was also very family oriented too back in high school, and my parents instilled that into me. My dad was raised by his great grandparents. So think you're 5 years old and your great grandparents are like 60. That's who you're being, sort of raised by. So he was raised by people who were born in the 1800s.
Wow.
So that's how I kind of was in high school. But I wanted to see more, Michael. Like I was like, I remember doing the dishes, back in high school. And I'm just like, yo, I'm doing this. Not necessarily for my family, even though I was like, I'm doing this for me because I want to be able to get out in the world and take care of myself, cook for myself, clean for myself, like go out and make $1 for myself so that nothing can hold me back from seeing the world, because I wanted to see what was out there beyond Arkansas.
Mm. Now, obviously, Harvard, you know, obviously pretty prestigious college. Why did you choose to go there?
Yeah, I remember seeing a YouTube video where Professor Charles Ogletree was talking about Black Wall Street, the massacre in Greenwood right outside of Tulsa. And I'll say it, I was enamored by the speech, by the confidence, by the conversation, by the depth of the research that he was doing. And that's when I was like, okay, I've never really seen a Black law professor like this. And then, you get wrapped up in the fact that he's taught some of the most successful Black lawyers that have come out of Harvard, including President Obama, Michelle Obama, First Lady, also coming through there as well. So that's when I first got introduced to it and started digging more into that. And I actually had a chance to visit Greenwood. And if you haven't done that yet, I would highly recommend going to Black Wall Street, because you can know the story, and I had read on it too. When you actually go in, to the building where they have the history and you read the panels and see the images and the photos, it tells a story that you're really not going to get outside of that. So I would highly recommend. And then I started reading other professors who were coming out of Harvard, and I was just like, this is where I want to be. So when I was in college, I actually only applied to 3 law schools because I felt like if I didn't go there, then I would just take a beat. Maybe, I wasn't ready to make that jump yet. And so Harvard was one of the 3 that I applied to. And when I got in, I went. And I'm glad that I did because I have some of my best friends from there. It was challenging. I'll tell you this quick story because it happened in our first year. I remember we were at a Black Law Students Association meeting, and a lawyer from the ACLU came to visit and was just, really getting us jazzed up to like make our presence known at the school and to protest at the time the shield that Harvard Law School had, which was from a slaver in Antigua. And, that was the school shield. And so we were kind of getting educated on that. And they recommended that we sort of put black tape over the shield in protest. And so some students did that. I don't know who. And then within a few days, I think, we walk into the school one day and they had taken that black tape from the shield. And in the main building of the law school, they had portraits of the professors on the first level and the second level. The second level were older professors, and the first level were some of the more recent professors. And somebody had taken the black tape off the shield and put it over the eyes of all of the black professors on that first level. And it rocked us to our core, right? And this is our first year in law school. And what was interesting is that we had a number of meetings, like town halls with the whole school. And I would say that like 90% of the school was on the same page that wasn't cool. And we can get into it later another time, but the free speech element ended up being an issue that I got very acquainted with through that process. But anyway, I had a great time at that experience because some of the professors even made space for us to talk about that. And it was sharp. It was good. I could go on and on about that, but I enjoyed my experience there. It taught me a lot about life and the law.
Nice. So when did you decide you want to be an attorney?
Yeah, I was always aware of it. I won't even pretend like I wasn't familiar with what it could, do, or the prestige of being a lawyer back home. I mean, that was a topic that was on the tongues. But when it really hit home for me was when I was in college. My Going into my junior year, I was a community support worker, which is like someone in the social work field, not quite in MSW, but I was doing house visits. So I had a week of training, and they gave me a caseload of like 13 people, and I called them up. I went to knock on their doors, and I would sit with them from 15 minutes to an hour and a half and go through interventions. All of these folks had different mental health challenges, from bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anger management, homelessness. Some people had they were on parole, or they had been convicted and served time for murder. And I was, some people were in, what people negatively maybe call halfway houses. So when I was going through that process, I had a client who had to go to court, and I went to court with him. And I remember sitting in the courtroom, and it was like 3 hours before he came, before it was time for his trial. And I just remember seeing so many people going down for like cocaine or drug use, and just it made me sick to my stomach, Michael. And then my client came up there, and his lawyer was making an argument because he was on trial for, how could you say, like, basically throwing money at somebody at McDonald's because they got their order wrong, essentially. So he was on trial for that, and the prosecution was trying to give him jail time for this. And the judge was saying to the lawyer for my client, "Hey, you need to use a different argument. I don't think that's what the law says." And his lawyer kept pushing it. Testified, didn't go well. Judge pulls the code from behind, like basically reads it, and instead of giving him jail time, he gave him 4 months probation. And so at the end of that trial, the lawyer said, "Hey, I'm really busy," which is true. Can you register him for probation? So I walked across the street with him, and as we're sitting and filling out the application, my client can't even spell his name on the application, not his name, his address on the application. And then we go to the back and they pull up his rap sheet and it's just scrolling and scrolling. And I'm just like, there's a connection all here. So let me at least get educated on the law so that I can be a better citizen and a better advocate for people moving forward.
Wow. Now, when I think of attorneys, I think of maybe Law and Order on TV, and I think of these attorneys, in these courtrooms defending their clients. So as an attorney, are you a trial attorney, or what exactly do you do?
Yeah, so the story that I just said, I don't do really any of that now. Now I'm a corporate lawyer. So my clients are businesses, and most of them are startups who are raising venture capital or entrepreneurs who have been in the game for a little bit of time, and many of them are in our community. And I saw that as a good pivot for me because even though I had been involved in politics in the past and policy, when I got to law school, I spent a summer in Atlanta working at the Federal Trade Commission, and I was investigating scams, Michael. And it was great. It was awesome. But I was like, hey, this is how people are doing business the wrong way. Like, what if people did it the right way? So I need to learn how money works. So I started taking more classes on private equity and managing funds and such. And so I went to work on Wall Street at a Wall Street law firm basically for 2 years. And I started getting interested in helping people in our community take those learnings and run with it. So that's what I do now. So in many ways, people will call me, hey, I need this contract reviewed, or I'm thinking about entering into this market. I need to raise money. Those are the type of issues I deal with. We need to let this person go, or we need to hire this person. We want to give this person equity. We want to protect our IP. We don't want to give away too much information. How do we navigate that? Hey, we're trying to enter this market. The government is involved. How do we navigate that? That's what I help people in our community to do now.
So with that being said, tell us about Go With Canvas.
Yeah, so Go With Canvas is a boutique venture capital law firm. And we, the initial business partners, we met at our previous firm in the venture capital group. And circumstances aligned to where we had a choice to make. Were we going to stay what we were doing, or were we going to try to go out on our own? And we decided to do that. And it's been one of the best decisions, at least for me, that I've ever made, because it helped us to be more nimble and to help people a little bit more. Because with the bigger firms, they have superstar lawyers without a doubt. They also have superstar overhead, and that cost often, can get passed on. And so we wanted to be a little bit more flexible in that regard. And it's allowed us to be a little bit more experimental to where we can provide great services at a great price point.
Now, since you work with startups as an attorney, so what are a couple of the biggest mistakes entrepreneurs make when they're starting their companies in terms of your profession? Like from a legal standpoint, is it securing their IP rights? What are some of the biggest mistakes entrepreneurs make when starting?
Yeah. Funnily enough, a lot of people think about securing their IP. It's on their mind. It's top of mind. They're like, hey, I want it, and I don't want to give up everything. Those are the two things that people are focused on. The two big things that I see and the issues that come up frequently. One is not papering relationships. You may be working with somebody on a handshake deal for a year. A year ago, they thought you promised them 7% in interest. Now you're like, wait a minute, I've learned more and I need that equity. Now I only really want to give you 2%. Now it's an issue because they don't want to sign the agreement. You need them to get papered up to move forward and raise money. And now you're at a standstill, and it can get litigious. That comes up frequently, even with friends who have known each other for 8 years. You sign a founder's agreement, things change. Now somebody wants to push you out. It happens a lot. I would say the relationships and defining those in an agreement early on, it sounds like a money pit or an unnecessary cost, but I'm telling you from experience, it usually ends up costing you more later on. Because when I was in law school, the first day of class and contracts, our professor was playing a BB King song, "The Thrill Is Gone." And he was making the point that, early on, the energy is there, but eventually sometimes that thrill is gone. So that's a big one. Another one is, even though people are aware of IP and protecting it, many people spend too much money on development. And why is that a legal issue? Because if you're not a programmer, if you don't have a technical background, you will often, hire people and trust whatever they say. And then they build something based on what you articulated, but there was something that was lost in the communication. So you say, hey, we don't want it like this. We actually want it like this. Well, the developers, they're going to go out and do it because they're good at what they do and that they're executing. But then the bill comes and you're like, wait a minute, why is this so much more? It's like, oh, well, you requested a change and that wasn't included in the scope of work. It's like, well, no, I didn't. How can you prove that you didn't say that? So another big change that we often look at is making sure that those change requests are in writing, because I've seen multiple times where people are paying $120,000, $130,000 on development for something that could have been built for 35 or 40,000. So I'm not a developer, but we have developers in our community and network who come in and help people to save money in that way.
Got it. Now, it is my belief, again, this is just Michael Taylor's belief, there's never been a better time to become an entrepreneur than right now. Once again, my belief. What are your thoughts about that comment?
Absolutely. I agree 1,000%. Just your ability to interface with other people is big, to get information. I think the biggest hangup, well, there are two big hangups for people. Obviously, the first one is the salary. It's easy to get comfortable with people paying you to give up your dreams. I mean, bills come due, you got things that are paid every 30 days. You got to make that. The salary is a quick fix for that. The second thing is that in entrepreneurship, there's not necessarily a blueprint for you or your particular business. You can even follow somebody else, but the people who are winning, they're constantly changing and updating their software as well. So there's not going to be people who say, do one, do two, do three, do four. Even with the master classes, even with the event that we had, there were people who were giving you conceptual advice. And the conceptual advice, if you know what to do with it, is way more value than people telling you an outdated formula. And so I think it's a great time because not only is there more conceptual advice that's available, but there are enough people who are viewing it who can kind of help you filter it. You find somebody that you trust, and then you can implement, whatever it is that you want to do. I do think it's a great time. Access to capital, regardless of what you see in the media, is still very much a possibility for people who have really good ideas and execution and team. You got the tools that you need. You got people who want to help you. I initially thought in business, Michael, that I had to be a certain way. I had to be vicious and ruthless, like all the people that you see in the media or in books. But I've met so many other people who are way more successful than I am, who have a kind and generous disposition. So I think, if you can find them, just know what to say when you get in the room with them, and don't try to ask them, hey, how did you do it? Ask them conceptual questions to build a mental framework that you can use for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned that we met at the Access Granted conference, which is basically hosted by Seneca Dunmore, who's amazing. And the conference is designed to support Black businesses in locating funding, because obviously locating funding in a lot of cases is the greatest challenge entrepreneurs have. So I'm curious, how did you become involved with Access Granted, and why do you think it's important for those types of conferences?
So Seneca reached out to me on LinkedIn with a video about 2 minutes long, mentioning me by name. It was very personalized. She said that she found, my profile, and she wanted to meet and thought it would be great to have a lawyer who came in and spoke at her conference that she was hosting at the time. Then it was in Memphis, which is close to home. It's where my folks live. And it was important to me to be a part of it because I see it all the time. In fact, that's one of the reasons I do what I do now, Michael, is because when I was in law school, there was a venture capital course. And this is uncomfortable to say, but I think people need to hear it. There was a venture capital course in law school, but I didn't take it, even though I was like, okay, that seems like that's where, it's happening, because I didn't see myself in it. It seemed very alienating to me. The other people who were in it were kind of just like, well, I know this and you don't, so this isn't for you. And that feeling was so intense that it didn't last long because I just moved on. But then once I got into the profession and realized that this was accessible, I didn't want anybody else to feel that way again. So that's why I started the podcast and interviewing other people so people could see, hey, there's not just one or two people. There are hundreds of people who are doing this in our community. And it's important because in a conference like Access Granted, the things that may be keeping you from funding could be one or two conversations away. Because as entrepreneurs, we don't necessarily always think like investors, and vice versa sometimes. And so listening to people who have written checks for founders, you can get a better sense of what it takes for you to be one of the recipients of those funds. And in real time at Access Granted, in both of the ones that I've been in, if you're an entrepreneur and you show up, there's a chance that you're going to have venture capitalists or investors or VC lawyers like myself who will walk you through your business and your ask and how to make it a little bit better. Not going to say that it's going to make you, get 5 yeses on Shark Tank, but you are going to get some really good insights into what you may be able to add to your pitch or your business model or building your moat.
Yeah. Yeah, it was an amazing conference. And like yourself, I actually ran across Seneca on LinkedIn also. I don't remember how it popped up, but I said, you know what? I need to be at that conference because, again, as an entrepreneur, I'm actually looking for funders right now, angel investors. I said, okay, well, let me get in that room. And I love what she said she said the key to locating funding is proximity.
Mm-hmm.
Getting close to people that has the access to the funds. And so
Yep.
I was like, okay, I got to go. But it was really a wonderful, wonderful conference. And again, I look at all the negativity out there in the media, and I saw some statistic the other day about Black wealth and how Blacks only had, basically saying we only got like $500 in the bank, and all these negative stereotypes about money. And my first thought is always, okay, so how can we as Black folk, number one, go against that stereotype, but more importantly, learn how to access capital, how to build companies. So in other words, how can we find solutions? And I thought that conference was a great solution for entrepreneurs. And I really enjoyed that conference. Now, let's talk a little bit about your podcast. So you mentioned your podcast. Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So Diverse Tech Founders Media, we interview founders and investors, mostly in the tech space, entrepreneurship space, really to highlight 3 things. One, who they are behind the company so that you can see these are real people, very similar to you. Oftentimes they started right where you are. Whatever you have in your bank account right now, many of these folks know what it's like to feel that. Secondly, what is their company and their business? It's a chance for those folks who, even if they're investors or entrepreneurs, to tell their story so you can get a deeper dive instead of, just reading an article or trying to surmise from, their posts online. You can hear from them because I've gotten more interested in asking like the harder questions and deeper questions because that's the feedback that I get. I'm sure you get similar feedback, Michael, where people are just like, no, we like it when they talk about the hardest thing they ever had to do or their lowest moment. Like, ask them the hard questions. Don't just make it all rosy. And so I've incorporated that feedback. And then third, we ask and derive from them insights that can help people to save time. So the advice that they give are really designed around how you can, skip over some of the mistakes that are unnecessary and prepare for those that are. And this concept of the podcast came about from throwing app launch parties in my apartment in Harlem. I was living in Harlem at the time with a roommate who was an artist called the Wall Street Artist, who is now a full-time artist. And even to this day, we still talk about people that we met at those app launch parties, including one founder who was a friend from my undergrad days who had just raised their Series A. 4 years later, they raised their Series B at $1 billion valuation. So people could see in the room, hey, there are people who look like us, who are accessible, who are scaling businesses and doing well. So I want people to see that and feel that. But the concept comes from a social capital framework that I use moving forward. I'm not going to say that, I invented it or came up with it or own it, but I haven't seen anybody else do it. So if you want to give me the credit, I'm happy to do that. And it's the 3 I's of social capital. The first is introductions. I was really bad at that. Now I understand a little bit better how to connect people. And I think that's super valuable. You may not have money, or financial capital, but Michael, you can go to others in your network, and an introduction is social capital. It will open doors. Number 2 is invitations. Being invited. I'm not going to say that Seneca was excluding anybody, but being invited to an event is social capital, because what we learned in that room was life changing. It really was. And by not being in that room, you can't tap into it. And number three is insights that save time, which I talked about already. So that's sort of the focus of the podcast. People are telling their stories. It's a long form like yours, Michael, where you sit down with people for an hour or longer. So you're not just speeding through these lightning questions. And it's been a wild ride. We are, as of this date, we have 66 episodes.
Nice. All right, so let's switch gears just a bit as we start to wind down. The intention of this podcast is to empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. And I define extraordinary as having inner peace, dynamic health, great relationships, and financial abundance, which simply means that you have enough money that you don't have to stress out over it. So how would you define an extraordinary life?
Number one is you know your purpose, and it's a definite purpose, and you strive for that purpose every day. We want to make a lot of money and we want to be comfortable and all that, but regardless of what you're doing, if you are in the top percentage, top 5% of those folks, you're going to be fine. You're going to be more than comfortable. You be excellent first. And then number two is finding the right relationship. Regardless of your predisposition and all that, finding the right relationship is super key. Somebody who will support you, somebody who will recognize changes in you and look to build you back up, somebody who isn't necessarily rah-rah all the time, but somebody who can be a mirror to you and to get you back on your game and to say, yo, this is the real you. Like, this is who you are. Get back up on it. So that would be the second thing. And then third is put yourself around other people. There are two quick stories here. One, I had a client and a friend who was like, this made me laugh, but he said, if you hang out with 5 barbers, you're going to be the 6th. It's kind of, opinion about being a barber or not, but the people that you are around, those are the people who you're going to be most like. Even, I heard recently that, the number one predictor of your health is the health of the people around you. So put yourself around good people. That's one of the benefits of going to certain, universities or schools. It's not necessary, but you could also go to conferences like Access Granted. That opens up another portal of relationships because you want people who are pushing you to be better.
Yeah. Now, I believe the key to success is constant and never-ending improvement. Therefore, I read a lot of books, constantly participate in personal development programs. I'm always learning new things. So what are some of the things that you do to invest in your personal development?
It's the same thing. It's books, it's going to the conferences. Oddly enough, in a lot of ways, it's meditation, because you mentioned self-awareness. That's super huge. When I was in college, I had to figure out, like, how do I navigate this without like stretching my mind too much? So anytime I gain more awareness and grow, and I'm just like, yo, just open the floodgates, whatever it is, just hit me with it. Eventually I have to redefine my boundaries. And that's not to say that I cut things off, but I redefine my boundaries in such a way that I extend them to encompass the new awareness, and then wait until I'm at a point again where I can raise my awareness again. So it's definitely books. I think reading is fundamental. I think YouTube is a blessing in a lot of ways if you can find the right channels to just learn and have things going on. My parents back in the day would listen to a lot of like Earl Nightingale. So I even listen to him, like on YouTube now. So I think it's a combination of people in your mind that are pushing you to be more optimistic and action oriented, but also technical skills. So I'm in a legal academy right now, and it has fundamentally changed the way that I see my law firm. You probably have different communities that are specific to your niche, where you can learn tricks of the trade from people who have done it. I'm trying to build, quote unquote, $1 million law firm. I need to learn from somebody who's built 7 of them.
That's, I'm glad you brought that up, because as a matter of fact, that was one of the questions that I have that I was going to ask you. As a huge proponent of meditation, I was going to ask you if you had tried it. And, if I had to sum up the 3 best things I've done in my life, meditation would be on that list. Because after my divorce, struggling with a lot of depression and stuff like that, and I was introduced to meditation because I used to I couldn't get my mind to shut off. It's like I used to get these what I call thinking headaches because my mind was always just going. And I remember seeing a documentary or something about meditation, and it says this is one way to kind of slow that down. And I've been meditating for over 30 years. And it's a huge part of it's actually part of my lifestyle. I cannot not do it. And I know that when I was brought up in the Baptist church, uh, I was taught that meditation was trafficking with the devil and you weren't supposed to do it and it was sinful. But meditation, again, it is high on my list of priorities when it comes to success because I attribute meditation to my creativity. Like I said, I love writing, written 12 books, and I know I can attribute a lot of that to meditation because it allows me to tap into that divine connection. And with that being said, I want to ask you, what role does spirituality play in your life?
A huge one, a big one. My dad is a preacher, so and we talk normally every morning, unless I'm up until 2 or 3 a.m. Normally, we wake up and talk with each other in the morning at about 5:30, and he helps keep me spiritually rooted. He reads a lot of spiritual books as well, in addition to the Bible, and that is sort of my foundation. It is, I say, the Lord's Prayer, like every time I go to bed, and even before I eat a meal every single time, because I know what it's like to be hungry. I want to recognize that moment every time. It also gives you a certain confidence as well to say, this is not all on me. Like, it's up to me to act, but I can tap into a source of additional discipline and inspiration to say, okay, there are people who have been on the planet for hundreds of years. Those people who were spiritually connected, they got results. How can I get similar results? And also, how can I give? Because I remember reading Ecclesiastes recently. I guess there are like 3 books of wisdom in the Bible. And by the way, like, I'm a Christian. I know other people have different faiths and religions as well. And what I found is that the tenets are often similar. The stories may be different. So this is just my walk and my faith. But the 3 books of wisdom in the Bible, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job, all 3 of those are phenomenal, especially for business owners. But Ecclesiastes threw me for a loop because it was somebody at the end of their life saying, hey, what is it all for? You may build something for your family, your children, but they may not even want it or take care of it. So why are you doing it? And that really sat right with me to say, okay, why am I pursuing what I am pursuing, and what is it all for? And at the end of the day, the author, says that, what they learned is, to live a good life, treat your wife or spouse well, eat good food, and serve the Lord. And that keeps it simple in my mind. But it's a foundation for me, and many of my clients are spiritual as well, and I don't shy away from talking about it if they bring it up as well, because that's where I get a lot of my wisdom and strength from, is from God and from getting in the Word. I'm not the best at it. I'm not like, hey, remember this reference or go here, or listening to gospel music 24 hours a day, but it is something I know I couldn't live without.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an important as a former atheist, I have to admit that, yeah, it's high priority. I use the term divine intelligence for God. That's how I see it, because I'm kind of a science guy and it makes sense in my head. But having that connection to divine intelligence is what allows me to find my heart's desire, knowing that I'm expressing the divine intelligence through me, through what I do. And I actually wrote a book called "What If Jesus Were a Coach?" And
Wow.
in the book, I talk about, my journey to find the God of my understanding and creating that intimacy and connection with God in a way that I never would have dreamed possible as a former atheist. But yeah, it's a really, really important part, I believe, is having a spiritual connection that nurtures your soul. And you get to choose what that looks like for you. But it is a very important part. Now, with that being said, though, obviously we have challenges in life. And I'm curious if you might have a go-to quote that you think about if you're dealing with challenges. Is there a go-to quote that comes to mind as you deal with challenges in your life?
That is a good one. One that they're kind of similar. And I don't know how you'll react to this, Michael, but I'll just say these are the two that came to mind, even if they're not quite applicable. One is, if you don't have always, you get nevers.
Mm.
And how you do one thing is how you do all things. Now, people have fought me on both of those, arguing back and forth. I don't know how you can argue about something like that where it's kind of personal to you, but those are two things that stick with me, because when we're going through challenges, oftentimes that's a break in our modus operandi. And if we get back to, okay, what do I actually need to be doing consistently, regardless of the circumstances? Let me get that right first, and then rise to whatever the challenge is. So those are really kind of what sits right with me. And then I'm sure you can pick out various scriptures and different moments that you could go to really say that. In fact, I'll just be straight up with you. There are times where I have been, suffered failure, where I have harbored, very bad feelings about other people, guilt, jealousy, hatred. And sometimes I will just Google scriptures on failure, scriptures on jealousy, scriptures on hatred. And I'll just read through like 20 scriptures and be like, okay, like this is helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it has little to do with religion as much as it has to do with spirit. So when we tune into those quotes, those scriptures that touch our hearts in a way that help change us, to me, that's what spirituality is. I think too many times we get so caught up into, the structure and the dogma and doctrine of religion, but it's really about tapping into that part of ourselves, I think, that is divine. And that part that is divine is connected to God. And so when we read those scriptures, we're touching that part of ourselves. That's kind of how I see it. And as mentioned, when we're deep in stuff, for me, I've had one quote that for some reason just has driven me for the last 20 years as I've been on this journey. I remember when I was homeless and I was sleeping in the back of my car. I actually lived in my car for 2 years. And I would have these little sticky notes that I'd stick on the back seat as I laid in the back seat of the car. And I think Jerry Rice is the person who said this, but he said, I will do today what others won't, so I can do tomorrow's what others can't. And it was something about that quote that as I was going through stuff, I remember just thinking to myself, okay, so today I know that I'm stuck in breakdown, but I know that there's going to be breakthroughs on the other side. So if I can just endure these temporary breakdowns, I'm going to break through. And here I am 30 years later, so living my version of an extraordinary life and being extremely happy. So that quote just always comes to mind. Just do today what others won't. And what most people won't do is, like you just mentioned, become self-introspective, to look at themselves in a way that they can change who they are, because that's really difficult to do.
Yeah.
And so it's to me, the key to growth is constant and never ending improvement, and being willing to change and challenge my perceptions about who I am. And that's how we grow. So next, I want to know what's up. What's coming up for Abraham? What's the big exciting project you got going on, or what special event that you have coming up? Anything you'd like to share?
Sure. I don't want to say too much at the moment, but I will say this, is that the legal industry is changing, and it's changing in a good way for the better, with technology and systems that are really accelerating access that entrepreneurs like yourself and your listeners have to quality counsel so that they can move fast, and also business strategy and advice from people who see it oftentimes. So I'll just say this, like, keep watching, be on the lookout, because like you said earlier, Michael, this is the best time to be an entrepreneur. And that is only going to continue as you develop your relationships with people who have done it.
Yeah. So how can people find out more about you? Where can they come find you?
Yeah, probably the most efficient way is LinkedIn. I do respond to messages, even, the congratulations. It takes me minutes sometimes for that, but I will respond to those messages, and I'm easy to find on there. Abraham J. Williamson is something that I check regularly, and people usually get in touch with me there. Also, if you're interested in the topic after you get done listening to Michael's podcast, pop on over to Diverse Tech Founders Media. If you mention the podcast, I often do respond there too.
And I'll have a link below this video for people to contact you. Which link would you like me to use? LinkedIn, to your podcast? Which link?
Probably use LinkedIn, I would
LinkedIn.
say.
Okay.
That's kind of the hub right now, and everything flows from there.
Got it. So here's your opportunity to share your final thoughts, whatever comes to mind.
I just want to be grateful for you, Michael. I mean, it is not an easy task to consistently pursue the projects that you're pursuing. And I just want to thank you for that. And being a part of it is definitely something that I don't take lightly. Just keep going with it. Like, this is a powerful medium to not just listen to stories, but also to share them. So I would just say, keep it up. And in parting words, support one another. I am I am pro reparations. I'm gonna just come out and say it. I think it's necessary for our people. I don't think there's another way that you can right the wrongs without some form, a big form of reparations that includes money. That being said, whether or not that happens or not, we can implement our own version of that conceptually within our own people to say, if we're asking other people to give up things that they otherwise wouldn't give up, we have to be willing to do that with each other. So if that's time, if that's money, we should be able to do that with each other and be a model for others, and carve out some of what we do: time, money, resources, mental energy, insights, pro bono services, and put that back in our community. It's a necessary part of us continuing to develop as a people.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And again, another reason for my optimism, brothers like yourself. Like I said, I'm an optimist. That's the lens through which I see the world. And as I look at, I've got over 100 episodes of my podcast, and the brothers that I've had on this, every time I interview one of you guys, I go, yeah, see, I know Black men are thriving. You may not see it in mainstream media, but we're shaking some stuff up and making some stuff happen. So again, Abraham, I just want to acknowledge you, brother, for who you are and what you're doing. And I don't believe in accidents. Everything happens for a reason. And I think we've been brought together by divine appointment to collaborate on some stuff in the future. And I know that'll happen as it unfolds. But again, I just want to wish you continued success in all of your endeavors. And it has been my absolute joy having you on the podcast.
Honored as well. Thank you, Michael, and looking forward to future episodes.
All right. So this has been another episode of Shatter the Stereotypes. And always remember, you have the capacity to create an extraordinary life. But to do so, you must be willing to put forth extraordinary effort. So think about that. I'll see you next episode. Take care.